Okay, so this is the last module in this chapter, chapter 10. And this module is going to talk about emotions. So, understanding emotional experiences. Remember, this chapter is motivation and emotion. So, we do have to talk about emotion at some point in time. So, there are 4 questions we are going to answer in this module. The first one is, what are emotions and how is it that we actually experience emotions? The second question is, what are the functions of emotions? There is a function behind being happy, being sad, being excited, being angry, right? There are functions behind them. The third one is, what are the explanations for various emotions? And then the fourth question we're going to answer in this module is, how does nonverbal behavior relate to the expression of emotions? Okay, so let's start out talking about emotions. First off, a basic definition. Emotions are the feelings that generally have both physiological and cognitive elements and that influence behavior. So with emotions, it's both physiological and it's cognitive. And the emotions are behind a lot of times what we do or why we perform the behaviors we perform. Our psychologists argue that there are 2 systems at play when you're talking about emotions. One of those systems governs emotional responses to a given situation, and the other one governs the cognitive reactions to them. All right? So there are 2 systems at play when you're talking about emotions. Some individuals or some researchers suggest that we first experience an emotional response and then later we try to make sense of it. So it's not like we have a thought and then an emotion. Some researchers believe that you have the emotion first and then you try and explain why you are having that emotion. Other researchers, though, suggest that we develop cognitions about a situation, then we react emotionally. So there is some split on what researchers believe. Is it that we have the emotion first and then the thoughts about why we are having it? Or is it that we have the thoughts first and then that causes the emotions? So there's no strong like, yes, it's this or it's that in the field as of right now. Let's think about the functions behind our emotions. They actually allow us to experience the depths of various conditions, such as despair, depression, remorse, but also happiness, joy, and love. You know, emotions actually help us experience all those different things. They also perform several important functions in our daily lives, such as preparing us for action, shaping our future behavior, and also helping us interact more effectively with other people. So there are 3 important functions for this: preparing us for action, shaping our future, and helping us interact more effectively with others. So how is it that we are able to label our feelings? That's the next thing to talk about. Most researchers would suggest that a list of basic emotions would include your more basic emotions, right? Happiness, anger, fear, sadness, and disgust. Those are your more basic emotions that you probably that you usually feel, not fear, that you usually feel more regularly than some of the other emotions that may exist. There are other ones that you are not as common or that don't happen as often are surprise, contempt, guilt, and joy. And there are substantial differences that exist in the description of emotions among various cultures, right? Culture can have a huge influence on your emotions and what you feel about those emotions. So this slide is taken out of your textbook. This slide is on the top of page 321 in your book, and it's how we organize our emotions, right? So emotions is at the top. That's the more generalized umbrella. Then you have both positive and negative emotions. So some of your positive emotions would be love and joy. And under love, you can have fondness and infatuation. Under joy, you could have bliss, contentment, and pride. So those are some of the positive. Now, if we go over to the right-hand side to the negative, 3 negative emotions are anger, sadness, and fear. With anger, we can have annoyance, hostility, contempt, and jealousy. With sadness, we can have agony, grief, guilt, and loneliness. And then with fear, we can have horror and worry, right? So this is kind of how we break down our emotions, how we organize our emotions into both positive and negative emotions. Let's look at the roots behind our emotions. In the next couple of slides, then, we're going to talk about various theories behind our emotions. But let's first talk about the roots of your emotions. Most emotions are accompanied by this general physical reaction. When we try to define the specific role that those physiological responses play in the experience of emotions, this has been a major puzzle for psychologists. When you have these general physical reactions, and then you're going to try and define a specific role to those when you experience those emotions, that's a lot more difficult. Some psychologists suggest that there are specific physiological reactions that cause us to experience a certain emotion. Other researchers suggest the opposite, that we experience the emotion first, and that causes the physiological reaction. So again, we do not have any, answer that is strongly one way or the other. There's a lot of divide among researchers in psychology about what happens first, the physiological response, and then you get the emotion, or is it the emotion that then causes the physiological response? It's kind of like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? We don't really exactly have this agreed upon answer for that. Okay, I want to spend the next couple of slides talking about various theories behind emotions. The first one is the James Lange theory. Do gut reactions equal emotions? So the James Lange theory is that emotional experience is a reaction to bodily events that are occurring as a result of some sort of external situation. So in this sense, the external situation and then the emotional response. So I feel sad because I am crying. It's not that you're sad and that's causing you to cry. Or you're crying and that's causing you to feel sad, right? So the James Lange theory is that the emotional experience is a reaction to a bodily event. You feel sad because you're crying. This theory, though, has some shortcomings that don't quite make sense. The visceral changes would have to occur relatively quickly for this to be the case. Also, the physiological arousal does not invariably produce an emotional experience. The physiological arousal does not invariably produce an emotional experience. And third, your internal organs produce a relatively limited range of sensations. So the James Lange theory, again, says that emotional experiences are a reaction to bodily events that occur as a result of some sort of external situation. Okay, the second theory. The second theory is the Cannon-Bard theory. The physiological reactions are the result of emotions. So the Cannon-Bard theory believes that both physiological arousal and emotional experiences are produced simultaneously by the same nerve impulse. So it happens at the same time. It's not that one occurs before the other, but they occur at the same time because of this nerve impulse. So this theory rejects the view that physiological arousal alone leads to your perception of emotion. After you perceive an emotion-producing stimulus, the thalamus is the initial state of your emotional response. And then it is the thalamus that sends that response to the autonomic nervous system and the cortex. Remember, the autonomic nervous system is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. They prepare your body for a stressful situation or they calm your body back down. So it is the thalamus that is the initial site, and then it sends that response to the autonomic nervous system and to the cortex. A third theory that we have on emotions, that is the Schachter-Singer theory. The Schachter-Singer theory of emotions. This is where we see emotions as labels. So this theory explains that emotions are determined jointly by a non-specific kind of emotional arousal and its interpretation. All of this based on some sort of environmental cue. And so this theory actually supports that cognitive view of emotions. Now, later research has determined that the Schachter-Singer view is not exactly correct, right? And it more so supports the idea that we may look to our surroundings to determine the source of the physiological arousal. So it's a lot more specific than what Schachter and Singer originally believed. Okay, this figure is at the bottom of page 322 in your textbook, and this is just breaking down the three different theories, right? The James Lange theory, the Cannon-Bard theory, and the Schachter-Singer theory. So the James Lange theory is that the activation of visceral body changes and the brain interprets the visceral changes as an emotional experience. The Cannon-Bard theory, it activates the thalamus and then sends it on to the brain. The Schachter-Singer theory is the activation of general or physical arousal leads to your observation of an environmental cue, which then is a determination of a label based on that arousal. So this figure just breaks down all three of these. It gives a comparison, as it says, of the three theories of emotion. So those are more of our historical views on emotion. Those three theories are more of the historical theories that we have. We have more contemporary perspectives on the neuroscience behind emotions. And this shows that different emotions actually produce this activation in various parts of your brain. So we know that the amygdala is the main emotional center of our brain. So we know that one area of the brain, the amygdala, plays a very important role. And it provides a link between the perception of the emotion-producing stimulus and the recall of that stimulus later on in time. Now, there are neural pathways that connect the amygdala, the visual cortex, and the hippocampus, right? So the amygdala is the emotional center of our brain. The visual cortex, that we're seeing what's causing that emotion. And then we know the hippocampus is involved with memories. So all three of those are connected by these neural pathways. And this then indicates that emotion-related stimuli can be processed and responded to almost instantaneously. It's almost immediate that this occurs. So here we have a picture in figure 3, and this is at the top of page 325 in your textbook, right? Here we have the amygdala center of your brain, which then is going to send that information to the hippocampus and also to the visual cortex. So the connections from the amygdala allow it to mediate many of the autonomic expressions of an emotional state through the hippocampus and the visual cortex. Now, we've been talking about all of the different theories on emotions, right? We have our historical ones, and then we have our new, more contemporary perspective. So how is it that we can make sense of the multiple perspectives on emotion? What we know is that emotions are complex phenomena. They encompass both a biological aspect and a cognitive aspect. And there is no single theory that we have come up with as of yet that has been able to fully explain all the facets of an emotional experience. So there's not one of those three historical ones or a contemporary view that's going to answer that question on which one is the correct one. We have no single theory to back that up as of, current day. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in this module is the facial feedback and the facial effect and facial feedback that we get, right? So this is nonverbal behavior that is connected with our emotions. We know that people across various cultures express emotions similarly. I remember looking at a study that was done previously, and it was looking at people from different cultures, and it asked them to express, the emotion of happy. And regardless of what culture they were in, they all smiled. Or, sadness, and they may be frowning, or anger, and you could see their eyes kind of crunch up a little bit. Excuse me. So people across cultures express emotions similarly. We have what's called the facial effect program. And this is a theory that there is a set of nerve impulses that produce a facial display that then reflects an emotion that is universal across cultures. That it is the nerve impulses that produce that facial display that goes along with an emotion. The facial feedback hypothesis states that facial expressions not only reflect the emotional experience, but they also determine how people experience and label emotions. So if we're going to look at how people, do facial expressions for various emotions, remember, keep in mind this is all nonverbal. So sometimes this can lead into misreading things. But this was done, and this talks about also on page 327 in your textbook, but you see here in the upper left corner, that's happiness. Beside it is sadness. Then you come down to the middle left, and that is disgust. And then you have anger beside that. If you go to the lower left, that is surprise. And then on the bottom right, that is fear. So this demonstrates those 6 primary emotions: happiness, sadness, disgust, anger, surprise, and fear. And this has been shown to happen cross-culturally. It's not just an American, United States view of emotions. Okay, so that ends chapter 10 on motivation and emotion.